Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox Recording here, critiquing subscriber mixes, episode 3. Okay, so before we begin, I just want to say that you could download my free polished production checklist. There's a link below in this video's description. The truth is that there's so much that most home studio owners gloss over when it comes to pro metal production. And in this free guide, I've highlighted the key points that most people will gloss over that you should not. So again, download the guide, look it over, and make sure you're applying all of these principles to your productions. I want you to achieve better results with the gear you already have, and this guide will definitely help you achieve just that. So before we begin, I also want to say this. We have to remember that mixing is an art form and is extremely subjective. So with that being said, I'm simply going to listen to these mixes and give you my gut reaction to what I think will help improve your mixes with minimal fuss and minimal tweakage. So our first mix here comes from Mr. Adam. Let's check it out. Well, Adam, I'm gonna be honest, I love this. I'm a huge Melodeath fan. Again, I like the classics like At the Gates, Old Arch Enemy, or Arch Enemy in general. So your genre of music is right up my alley, and I actually really dig the production. The one thing that stands out for me is just everything is nice and balanced. I can hear everything nice and in a clear manner. I also like that the drums don't sound over compressed. They have a nice kind of like, I don't know, like a warm, sort of like earthy tone to them. Even though they might be programmed, they sound like they might be programmed, but either way, I like the overall drum sound. It's not a typical overly processed, overly EQ'd sounding mix at all. I really dig what I'm hearing. Now, you mentioned to me that you're having an issue with keeping your vocals nice and consistent. And I'm gonna be honest, that's not gonna be something hard for you to implement because the vocals already sound consistent to me. So if you're having issues with that, the one thing you're gonna wanna do is, stack compressors and maybe use a brick wall limiter at the end of your chain just to catch any stray peaks on your vocal tracks. Especially when you're working with a consistent vocalist, at least from what I've heard so far in this mix, your vocalist sounds pretty consistent. So again, thank you for submitting your mix, and also let me know more about this project. I'd actually like to check it out. I really dig this genre of music. It's my cup of tea. So Adam, thanks again for your submission, and hopefully that'll help you achieve the vocal sound that you're looking for. Okay, our next mix here comes from Mr. Arif. Let's check it out. Okay, Arif, I just want to say that the mix overall sounds great. Now, you mentioned to me that you were having an issue with low end. But with that being said, some of the palm mutes are sounding slightly rushed ahead of your drum tracks. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that when things like that exist within a production, it can give the overall effect of an issue with your low end, but it's actually an editing issue. So what I highly recommend is digging deep into your production and making sure that your guitars are nice and in the pocket throughout the duration of the entire production, especially your rhythm guitars. It's important for your lead guitars as well, but it's most important for your rhythm guitars and bass guitar. You want to make sure that your drums, bass guitar, and rhythm guitars are all working very well together in order to achieve a nice, crisp, clear, and tight low end. And if you notice, this has nothing to do with EQ or compression. This is an actual arrangement or performance or editing thing. Because to me, the low end sounds, somewhat in check, but I do know what you're talking about, because back in the day when I would work on my own music, little discrepancies like that I wouldn't really pay attention to. I would think it was a low end issue, but it was actually an editing issue. Overall, most of the guitars sound tight, but I really noticed on some of those some of those like chuggity parts, chuggity. But yeah, man, that would be my biggest piece of advice here, is just make sure all of your guitars are pocketed. It will make a massive difference. Believe me, much more than you'd think. So Arif, thank you so much for sending me your mix, and hopefully that points you in the right direction. Okay, our next mix here comes from Mr. Tristan. Okay, well, Tristan, I just gotta say, man, first I just gotta say this. You guys have been impressing me with these mixes. Just the overall productions, tightness, everything is sounding great. And Tristan, your mix here is no exception. All the performances sound awesome. The overall mix sounds really professional, super tight. I really like the guitar tone. I know you mentioned to me you're not crazy with the clarity of your guitar tone and the level of your kick and snare. And I'm gonna be honest, the only thing that stands out to me, and even by visually looking within my DAW, is that your mix is really, really limited. Like, there is almost no dynamic range. Now, this is obviously a personal preference, but here's the thing. When you really severely limit your track like that and make it super squashed, there are gonna be artifacts, and I do hear a little bit of distortion. Some people like this, some people don't. Me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of it, because what ends up happening is it makes the mix sound harsh. And a lot of these issues that you're bringing up, like the clarity of your guitars and the level of your kick and snare, will be greatly affected by this situation here, by the limiting on your mix. What I would do is experiment with just leaving a little more breathing room in your mix, and you'd be shocked at how much more you'll end up liking your overall production as a whole, both your guitar tone and your kick and snare levels. Because again, it doesn't sound like the kick and snare is overly loud or too quiet. It kind of sounds balanced for this kind of aggressive track that you sent. So I would experiment with that, because remember, these days with streaming services, your mixes don't have to be blasting loud. And again, I do hear some clipping happening. Obviously, there's clipping on some pro records. If that's the thing you're into, then, by all means, keep doing it if that's your own personal preference. But a lot of these issues that you mentioned to me can be caused by severe limiting on a track and just over processing on the master. Again, I really love the music. To me, the guitar tone sounds great, but I would, if this were my mix, coming from my perspective, I would back down the limiting just a little and see if you like it. So Tristan, thank you so much for your submission, and it sounded sick. Okay, our next mix here comes from Mr. Elmer. Let's check it out. Okay, Elmer, mix is sounding great. The source sounds are sounding cool. I know you mentioned you're struggling with clarity, and there are a few things that are sticking out to me. I hear a buildup in the lower mids in both the guitars and your bass guitar. And here's the thing, you're gonna wanna choose which instrument is gonna be dominant in that range. I recommend pulling out some of the lower mids in your bass guitar to make room for your rhythm guitars, because I hear some conflicting happening in that range. Also, it seems like your rhythm guitar is heavy on the left side. Check that out again. Yeah, dude, you're gonna wanna check the levels. To me, it seems like your left guitar is louder for some reason. And the other thing I noticed is that you might wanna use a tube screamer or an overdrive, even if it's within your amp sim, to just help with the pick attack on your guitar tone. The guitar tone itself has a cool character to it, but you might wanna mess around with different impulse responses just to find something that's a little less fizzy. And also, you're gonna wanna use a tube screamer as well to tighten up that pick attack on the way into the front end of your amp sim. And if you haven't downloaded it yet, you could download my impulse response for absolutely free. There's a link below in the video's description. Give it a shot, and I think you might like it. It's definitely not fizzy, and this is because I spend a lot of time dialing in proper mic placement on a V30 in my favorite Mesa Boogie cab, and fizz is never an issue when you do it that way, at least in my opinion. So those are my biggest notes. Watch for that buildup in the lower mids where your bass guitar is gonna fight with your rhythm guitars, and pick one instrument to live in that range. In my opinion, I would highly recommend leaving your guitars as natural as possible with as minimal EQing as possible and cutting some of that out of your bass guitar. Try a different impulse response and definitely drive the front end of the amp with a tube screamer. That will do a great job of tightening up your tone. So Elmer, thanks again for your mix submission. Okay, and our last mix here comes from Mr. Henning. Let's check it out. Okay, Henning, overall the mix sounds great, and there are two things that stand out to me. The first thing is you're gonna wanna take your hi-hat and turn it down. It's definitely, it's taking off my head a little in the left side. It sounds like it's panned toward the left. Hi-hat sounds great, cymbals sound great. Just take the hi-hat and just turn it down just so it blends well with the overheads and the overall mix in general. The other thing is I noticed that I hear the clank of your bass guitar, which is cool, but you're gonna wanna turn up your main bass track. Now this only applies if you're splitting your bass track between the distorted mid-range and then your standard undistorted or non-distorted bass track. You're gonna wanna turn your regular bass track up and keep your mid-range where it is. Now, if this is just the sound of a single bass track or bass performance, I would highly recommend boosting around the 100 to 80 hertz range. You don't have to get overly scientific with it, but I do hear a hole in that range within that octave where the bass should be sitting. So it sounds kind of empty in the bass guitar department around the 100 hertz area of the spectrum. And those are my two biggest points. Overall, the balance sounds cool. The performances sound great as well. Just turn the hi-hat down and bring up the low end of your bass guitar, and that'll help fill out and balance your mix in a much more, elegant way, at least in my opinion. So I would just like to shout out and thank everyone who submitted their mixes so far. And if you've sent a mix and haven't gotten to it yet, please be patient. I will get to it eventually within one of these upcoming videos. I've just received so many that it's taking a while to get through them, but I will get to yours eventually, so be patient. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload more weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. You can both like and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Links are in the description below. And again, I want you to achieve better results within your home studio without having to buy any new gear whatsoever. So download my polished production checklist, which will help point you in the right direction. There's a link below to the checklist. It's absolutely free. And also, if you want to submit one of your tracks, there are detailed instructions in this video's description. Till next time, happy mixing.